After months of wrangling and talking about it, the Republicans have unveiled their tax plan. If passed, it would be the biggest tax reform, the biggest change to the tax code in more than 3 decades. The proposed bill would cut corporate taxes quite a bit, increase deductions, and otherwise simplify the code substantially. Mick Mulvaney is the director at the Office of Management and Budget, the fabled OMB, and he joins us tonight. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So there's always a winner and there's always a loser in any kind of change. Who are the winners under this plan and who are the losers?
I think the winners are probably the middle class. They're going to end up paying less tax, and it's going to be easier for them to pay it. So it's a simpler, fairer system. About 90% of households, I think, Tucker, right now actually hire somebody else to do their taxes. That's not big companies. That's not even small companies. That's families are paying people. Yeah. Ordinary folks are paying somebody else to do their taxes. And we let them pay less and pay it themselves, pay it more simply. And I think that's a big win for people. I think that the economy writ large is the other big winner here. That's what's driving that corporate tax. I hope we get a chance to talk about that. But a big piece of this, a central piece of this, is the corporate tax rate reduction. We do that to try and drive productivity, drive investment in America, drive economic growth, economic development. So I think the two winners here are the individual families, ordinary Americans, what some people call the middle class. Everybody, of course, everybody considers themselves to be middle class. And then the overall economy, because we're sort of revitalizing that American machine.
So who are the losers?
I think right now, if you probably make a lot of money at the very high end and you have a very expensive house in New York or California, you're probably a loser, because one of the proposals is to remove the deduction for state and local taxes. And if you're living in a $2 million house in Los Angeles, California, you're going to pay more tax.
So the idea is that if you, and they're almost all blue states that have these, New Jersey, California, New York, have very high property taxes, but they're in effect subsidized by the rest of the country under the current code because they're deductible.
That's why I think we can talk about the economic impact of a lot of these things, and I hope we do, but from a general policy, getting rid of that state and local tax deduction is a great policy, because you're absolutely right. Folks in places like South Carolina have been subsidizing folks who live in New York City for a long time, and it's just not fair. That's why we talk about a more fair tax code and getting rid of those types of
So you say very rich people will pay more. What's the threshold for very rich?
It depends. It's sort of hard to say, and it is. One of the things I think that everybody's learned as we've gone through this is that there is no ordinary American family. There's so many different moving pieces and parts. You could live in a fancy house making a lot of money in a low tax state, and the difference would be treatment would be very different than if you're living in a house in a high tax state. So you asked me who the losers were. Folks who are making a lot of money, living in a very expensive house in California. The winners are a lot of other folks, but it's sort of hard to say in between.
So if I go to work every day and live off the wages that I make,
you're a lot better off.
I'm taxed at one rate. Yeah. But if I inherit a bunch of money and live off the dividends of the investments of the money that I inherited, I'm taxed at a much lower rate. Why is that? Why is that fair, and will that come closer into balance?
Say that again. I didn't follow the question. I'm sorry.
Well, our taxes on labor are far higher than the taxes on capital.
Correct.
Right? So if I inherit a bunch of money and live off the dividends of my investments of that money, I'm paying a lot less than someone who just works. So
you're absolutely right. If you're making $50,000 in dividends, is it really going to be different than $50,000 in earnings? To a certain extent, perhaps. But keep in mind, we're increasing the standard deduction here to take it, I think it's to $24,000 for a family. All right, which is a lot of money to be earning in interest if you've inherited from someplace else. But if you're a family making $24,000 a year, your effective rate is 0 on that.
Right.
And I think that's what's more important to you.
But we're still taxing. I mean, we tax things based on whether we think they're good or not. So cigarette taxes are so high, and solar panel subsidies are real. So like, I've never really understood why we tax investments at so much lower rate than we do.
Actually, I think we're trying to move away from that. Clearly, we don't get rid of all of those discrepancies.
Right.
But we do move away from a tax code that is driven towards behavior. Most of the deductions are gone. Most of the loopholes are gone. In fact, I think the only ones that we're really sort of pushing right now are the charitable deduction and the mortgage interest deduction.
Yep.
Everything else pretty much gone.
So tell me,
that tax break you got for buying a solar-powered something or other. I mean, all of that tax code, the use of the tax code to drive your behavior, we try and get rid of because we don't think it's fair.
Quickly, the corporate tax rate was 35?
35 now.
35 now.
You for C corporations, large corporations, yes.
Bring it down to 20. If you do that, what percentage of companies will actually pay that, big companies will pay that full 20, do you think?
Again, we think more will pay that rate than pay the 35% rate now because we get rid of all of these deductions. Keep in mind, one of the things, again, come back to the policies involved with this. At a 35% tax rate, which is a fairly stiff tax rate, in fact, it's the highest of any developed country in the world, right? The power that lobbyists have to go and get a special tax credit or a deduction for your industry is pretty severe because you're paying a very high rate.
I'm laughing because I live next to them, and they all have bigger pools than I do, yes.
And when you take that rate down to 20%, the ability, the stuff we can give away goes away, that the leverage they have goes away.
No, that's a totally fair point. And if you live here, you see it, and I know you have. Thank you very much for joining us, Mick Mulvaney.
Thanks, Appreciate it.